The jade bracelet lay in a shallow rosewood box on the third shelf of a lacquered cabinet in a hanok in Yangpyeong at 4:12 in the afternoon on the 11th of April, and the light through the rice paper doors had turned the color of steeped barley. The box was 280 years old. The bracelet inside it was older. It had come down through 7 women in the Kang family, each of whom had worn it once, on the day the family accepted her as its own, and then set it back into the silk lining where it waited, patient as a held breath, for the next daughter it would find. The silk was the pale green of the underside of a magnolia leaf. The bracelet was jade, the color of river ice in the second week of March. 11 kilometers east of that cabinet, in a suite on the 41st floor of the Signiel Seoul, Kang Min-jae was drinking a Balvenie neat and watching a helicopter cross the Han River from north to south. He was 41 years old. The scar under his left jaw, 3 centimeters long, had been given to him in Busan in the autumn of 2003 by a man who was now dead and whose name he had not spoken in 19 years. His shirt had been pressed that morning in a laundry room in Cheongdam-dong by a woman who had pressed his shirts for 11 years and who had once, in the second winter of his first marriage, taught his wife how to fold a jogori so that the collar would not crease. He thought, without meaning to, of his Halmione. He thought of the way she had, in the last spring he had visited her before the divorce, set a bowl of doenjang jjigae in front of the woman he was about to lose, and said, in the voice she used, only for things she considered already decided, "Eat, my child. You have been thin since October." He had laughed then. He had assumed his grandmother said such things to everyone. He had been wrong. He did not yet know how wrong. On paper, Kang Min-jae was the chairman of Daehan Holdings, a private group whose registered address was a 27-story building in Yeoksam-dong, and whose declared holdings ran to 3 shipping subsidiaries, a controlling stake in a mid-tier Korean pharmaceutical firm, a majority interest in a Vladivostok cold storage logistics chain, and, through a Labuan-registered trust, a 49% silent share in a Singaporean private bank that specialized in the estates of the newly wealthy of Southeast Asia. He had signed, 6 weeks earlier, a memorandum of understanding with the Han family. Old money in the true old sense, 3 generations of steel and 1 generation of shipbuilding, for a merger that would consolidate his logistics arm with their maritime engineering division. The document had been 31 pages long. He had read it once. He had signed it in a boardroom in Gwanghwamun on the 14th of March, and afterwards he had eaten a bowl of naengmyeon at a restaurant his father had liked in the 1980s. He was engaged. Her name was Han Yerin. She was 29, the youngest daughter of the Han family, educated at Yonsei and at the London School of Economics, fluent in 4 languages, kind in the way that people raised inside great houses are kind, as an accomplishment, as a room they had been trained to keep clean. She wore white in the way that priests wear white. Their engagement had been announced quietly in a private column of the Chosun Ilbo, and loudly in the boardrooms of Yeouido. The wedding was to be in June. The bride price had already been discussed. The alliance would make both families, as the older men liked to say when they were drinking, untouchable. He had been married once before. He did not talk about it. The woman's name had been removed from 3 separate family registers by a lawyer named Yang, who had charged him 41 million won for the work, and had done it in 1 afternoon, on paper. His mother had warned him 3 times. He had not called them warnings then. He called them, in the private accounting he kept of his own life, the small stubbornnesses of an old woman who had been born in a village that no longer had a name. The first time had been at a table in Bukchon, on the evening of the 7th of September in the second year of his first marriage, when his mother had set down her chopsticks halfway through a plate of jaune and said, without looking up, "A woman who does not ask for anything is the most expensive woman in the world, my son. Learn what she is spending before she stops." He had smiled. He had thought she meant money. The second time had been at the wooden gate of the Hanok in Yangpyeong on a January morning so cold the persimmons on the tree in the courtyard had frozen into small orange lanterns. His Halmione had held his sleeve as he was leaving and had said, in Hangul so plain it was almost a child's Hangul, "Some houses have two doors. Yours has one, and she is the one holding it open. Do not close it while she is standing in it." He had bowed. He had thought she was tired. The third time had been across a low, black lacquered table in a private room at a restaurant in Seongbuk-dong, 4 months before the divorce, when his mother had looked at him over the rim of a cup of barley tea and said, very softly, "You will remember this dinner, Min-jae." He had already forgotten what they had eaten by the time he reached his car. He had been wrong. He did not yet know how wrong. The message arrived at 7:34 p.m. on the 17th of April, 6 days after his fiancée had flown to Milan for a final fitting. It was a manila envelope, unsealed, delivered by a courier from a firm in Mapo-gu, whose surveillance cameras retained footage for exactly 72 hours. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of hotel stationery from the Four Seasons Seoul, folded once. On the sheet, in a hand he had not seen in 5 years and 4 months, someone had written an address in Pyeongchang-dong, a room number, and a time. 9:47 p.m. Come alone. The pen had been a Muji gel pen, black, 0.5 millimeter, and it had been bought that afternoon at a Muji in Myeongdong for 3,200 won in cash. He did not know that yet. He would know it later, when a forensic accountant with a Nigerian passport walked him through the courier's log, one line at a time. He read the note twice. He set it down on the marble of the bar. He laughed once, a short, dry sound that no one at the bar heard. He finished his balvenie. He made one phone call to a driver he trusted and told him the car would not be needed. He waited 41 minutes. Then he walked out of the Signal with his overcoat over his arm and took a taxi, because a chairman of Daehan Holdings did not, as a rule, do such things. And this was the first small act of a man who had begun, without knowing it yet, to disobey the version of himself he had spent 20 years building. The taxi took him north across the river and then east into the hills of Pyeongchang-dong, where the roads narrow and the walls grow high and the houses hide behind stone. The address was a small guest house, 6 rooms, 1 courtyard, a maple tree in the middle of the courtyard whose leaves had not yet opened. He paid the driver in cash. He walked up the stone path. He knocked twice on the door of room 4. The door opened. She was standing in the light of a single low lamp, and for the first full second, he did not recognize her, because the woman he had married had been 29 and had laughed at everything. And this woman was 34 and did not appear to have laughed in some time. Her name was Adaeze Kang, born Adaeze Ifechi Onwuka in Enugu, Nigeria, on the 14th of June, the daughter of a pediatrician and a professor of comparative literature at the University of Nigeria at Nsukka. She had come to Seoul at 22 on a scholarship in forensic accounting at Yonsei, had stayed for a master's at Seoul National in financial crime, and had, at 26, married a man named Kang Min-jae after 11 months of a courtship that had begun when he walked into a coffee shop in Hyewa-dong and asked her, in careful English, whether the seat across from her was taken. She was wearing a navy blue dress the color of the Han at midnight. Her hair was pulled back. In her left hand, She held a manila folder considerably thicker than the envelope he had received that afternoon. She had lost weight. He could see it in her wrists. She looked at him for perhaps 3 seconds. She did not smile. She did not smile. She said, "Sit down, Minjae." He sat. "If you are already leaning forward, if the pulse in your throat has quickened, if you have set down whatever you were holding when this began, then stay with me." Subscribe to Midnight Love Saga. Tap the small bell so that the next chapter finds you the moment it is finished, in the small, quiet hour when you needed it most. What happens in the next 41 minutes will unmake your understanding of loyalty in 3 places, of family in 2, of forgiveness in 1, and will build in their place something older, harder, and more human than what you walked in here believing. Stay in the room. Do not go yet. And when it is over, when the cherry blossoms have fallen and the photograph on the wall is the last thing left, tell me, in the comments, the name of the person in your life who saw your worth before you did. Just the name, nothing else. To understand what happened in that room in Pyeongchang-dong, you have to go back 5 years and 7 months. To a soul that no longer exists in either of their memories the way it actually was. A soul in which Kang Min-jae had not yet taken over the pharmaceutical company, in which the merger with the Han family had not yet been imagined, in which the woman across from him in the guest house still laughed with her whole face and left her shoes at the door in the order in which she had removed them, always the left one first. They had met in the autumn of 2018 in a coffee shop on a small side street off Hyehuadong on an afternoon so ordinary that neither of them, later, could remember the weather. He had been 35, newly the vice chairman of what was then still called the Kong Group, tired in the particular way that men become tired when they have inherited more than they wanted and less than they had been promised. She had been 28, 3 months into her master's thesis on the movement of illicit capital through Southeast Asian shell corporations, wearing a gray cardigan she had bought in a market in Enugu and had brought with her to Korea because it reminded her of her mother's hands. He had asked in English whether the chair across from her was taken. She had answered in Korean that it was not, and had then added in English that his Korean was probably better than her English, so they might as well use his. He had laughed. It was, he would think later, the first laugh he had produced in 9 months that had not been a business laugh. They were married 19 months later, at a small ceremony at the Hanok in Yangpyeong, in the courtyard where the persimmon tree stood. His Helmione had insisted on the location and on the food. Ade had worn a hanbok the color of pale pomegranate, and her mother had flown in from Enugu with 3 of her aunts, and one of the aunts had brought a small bag of ogbono seeds, so that the bride could, in the words the aunt used in Igbo and Adaizi, translated into Korean with a laugh, cook for her mother-in-law the soup that would bind the 2 families. His Helmione had eaten 2 bowls of it. She had asked for the recipe. She had asked twice. For the first 18 months of their marriage, they lived in a house in Seongbuk-dong that had 4 rooms and a garden with a stone lantern in it. Adaze took a position at a financial crime consultancy in Uido and worked long hours. He was building the pharmaceutical acquisition and worked longer. They had a daughter in the autumn of 2020. They named her Kang Chi-won, and because Adaizi's mother had wept on the phone when they told her, they gave her a second name, Chinaza, which in Igbo means God answers. And they wrote both names on the birth certificate, and on the 100th day they held a small doll banchi at the Hanok, and his Helmione had sewn, by hand, in the light of a lamp she had kept from her own mother's house, a small silk quilt in 5 colors with a magpie stitched into the corner. Chi-won lived for 11 months and 4 days. She died in the pediatric intensive care unit on the 14th floor of Severance Hospital at 4:12 in the morning of the 9th of September, 2021, of a viral cardiomyopathy, the attending cardiologist described, in a low voice to her parents in the corridor, as one of those things that medicine does not yet fully understand. Adayez did not scream. Kang Min-jae did not weep. They stood in the corridor for 1 hour and 41 minutes, and then Adayez walked back into the room and sat with the small body for a further 2 hours, alone, because she had said, in a voice her husband had never heard before, that a child should not be alone in a room in the first hour after she has stopped being a child. They buried her in a plot in a hillside cemetery in Yangpyeong, 300 meters from the Hanok. The stone was small and gray and bore, in Korean and in Igbo, the 2 names she had been given, and 1 date. After that, something in the marriage went quiet. Not broken, quiet. Adayez went back to her consultancy. Kang Min-jae went back to the acquisition. They ate dinner together on the evenings he was in Seoul. They did not speak of the child. His halmayoni came to their house every Sunday for 3 months with a small pot of samgyetang and sat with Adayeze in the kitchen while she ate it, and did not speak of the child either, but held her hand across the table. Then the pressure began. His uncle's first, an alliance with the Han family, had been in discussion since before his marriage, and the death of the child, some of them said quietly at gatherings his wife was not invited to, had removed the last argument for keeping a foreign daughter-in-law in a house that was about to matter. His business partner's next, a Nigerian wife, they said, more delicately, was a complication for certain relationships in Singapore and in Zurich. Then his own mother once, in a voice she did not use twice, said only, "Min-jae, be careful what you let them convince you that you are choosing." He divorced Adayez in the winter of 2022. She did not argue. She did not ask for anything. She packed 1 suitcase, a soft-sided Rimowa she had bought at Incheon on her way in 4 years earlier, and she went to say goodbye to his halmioni at the Hanok, and the old woman had held her face in both hands in the courtyard where the persimmon tree stood, and had said, in a voice that carried across the stones, "You are not leaving this family. You are only leaving this house. Remember which is which." Adayez had bowed. She had walked out through the wooden gate. She had not come back. That was the first quotable line. You are not leaving this family. You are only leaving this house. Remember which is which. His halmioni had said it in the winter of 2022, and Kang Min-jae had not been there to hear it, and no one had told him, and it had waited 5 years and 4 months to arrive at him across the marble of a bar in the Signal, and drop into his chest like a stone into a still well. Now, in room 4 of a guest house in Pyeongchang-dong, Daisy opened the folder. She had, she said, been working for 11 months on a matter she had not expected to become his matter. A firm in Zurich had approached her consultancy in the spring of the previous year regarding an irregularity in a Labuan-registered trust that had, in turn, funneled approximately 4,300 million, one through a Singaporean private bank, into 3 shell entities registered in the Cayman Islands and controlled, through nominees, by a person whose name she would come to in a moment. The trust had been established in 2019, revised in 2021, and revised again. This was the detail she wanted him to note, 6 weeks after his daughter's funeral. It had been set up to survive him. It had been set up, in its most recent revision, to survive him imminently. 3 people had already died in connection with the paperwork. The first, a compliance officer at the Singaporean bank, had fallen from the 7th floor of an apartment building in Bukit Timah on the 19th of August of the previous year. The coroner had ruled it a suicide, though the officer had left no note and had, that morning, ordered groceries for the following week. The second, a Zurich-based accountant, had died in a single-car accident on the road between Zug and Bar on the 3rd of November. The vehicle's brake lines had, the Swiss police report noted in a paragraph that had not been released to the press, shown signs of pre-impact wear inconsistent with the vehicle's service history. The third, a Vladivostok logistics manager whose signature appeared on 17 of the shipping manifests Adaiz had traced, had been found in the harbor on the 4th of February. The cause of death had been recorded as drowning, and the Russian authorities had not, so far as she had been able to determine, opened an investigation. The person controlling the shells, she said, was Han Yerin's uncle. His name was Han Sung-jin. He had been, until 2019, the treasurer of the Han family's principal holding company. He was, at present, the man across the aisle from Kang Min-jae at every board meeting he had attended in the last 18 months. He was the man who had, at a dinner in Cheongdam-dong in February, poured him a glass of suntory and said, in the tone of a man welcoming a younger brother, Hyung-nim, "We are lucky to have you." The merger, Adaiz said, was not a merger. It was an absorption dressed as one. The pharmaceutical company Kang Min-jae had spent 4 years building would be transferred, within 9 months of the wedding, into a subsidiary controlled through the Leibuan Trust. The shipping arm would follow within 18. His personal holdings, once his marriage to Han Yerin was on the register, would be commingled through a marital property clause. His own lawyer, a man named Jang, who had also handled the divorce, had inserted at the request of the Han family's counsel in a revision dated the 29th of January. "They will not need you alive," Adaiz said, after the fiscal year closes. She said it in the voice she had used 5 years earlier to say that a child should not be alone in a room in the first hour after she has stopped being a child. She said it, and she did not look away. Kang Min-jae read the folder. He read it twice. He set it down on the low table between them at 11:41 p.m. He asked her 3 questions. He asked, first, how she had come to be the one working on this. She said the firm in Zurich had asked her because she had, in the previous year, published a paper in the Journal of Financial Crime on the movement of illicit capital between Southeast Asian trusts and Central European private banks, and her name had come up. He asked whether she had known, when she had accepted the engagement, that he would be the man at the center of the diagram. She said she had known on the 4th day. He asked why she had not walked away. She looked at him for a long time. She said, "Because your Halmione is still alive." That was the second quotable line. He did not know his Halmione was still ill. He had assumed, from the composed voice she used on the telephone, from the standing invitations to Sunday lunches he had not accepted in 14 months, that the arthritis he had been told about 3 winters ago was the whole of it. Adaiz told him then, without inflection, that his Halmione had been diagnosed in 2020, 6 months before Chi-Wan was born, with a form of restrictive cardiomyopathy that her cardiologist at Asen Medical Center had, at the time, estimated would give her between 4 and 18 months. She had not told her grandson. She had told, at her own insistence, exactly one person. The person she had told had, for the following 4 years and 3 months, driven her to Asan every second Thursday, had paid, out of her own savings and out of the sale of a set of earrings her mother had given her at 18, for 2 courses of an experimental medication that the Korean National Health Insurance had declined to cover, and had slept, on the nights when the old woman was admitted, in a chair beside her bed in a private room on the 9th floor. She had continued to do this after the divorce. She had continued to do it, in fact, on the Thursday, 2 weeks before the courier had delivered the manila envelope to the Signiel. She had not told him, Adaiz said, because his Halmione had asked her not to. She had promised. She had kept the promise for 4 years and 3 months, and she had come to room 4 of a guest house in Pyeongchang-dong at 9:47 p.m. on the 17th of April. Not because she wanted to save him, and not because she still loved him in the way a wife loves a husband. She had come because his Halmione had asked her, 6 days earlier in a room at Asan Medical Center, to make sure her grandson did not die of a mistake he was about to make while she was still alive to know it. "I came back," Adais said, "for the boy your Halmione loved. Not for the man you have been for the last 5 years. That man I do not know anymore, and I do not need to know. But the boy she raised, the one who used to carry her to the garden every morning because her hips could no longer carry her, that boy is still worth walking into a room for. I came back for him." That was the third quotable line. That was also in the counting Kang Min-jae would keep years later, the sentence after which he understood that he had been mourning the wrong death. She said then, "One more thing. I did not come back to be your wife again, Min-jae. I did not come back to take your name. I did not come back to sit at your table, or to raise your children, or to be photographed at your side in the columns of the papers that will, in 6 months, write about you as a survivor. I came back to make sure your Halmione does not bury you. That is the only thing I came back for. When it is done, I will go home. Do not confuse the door I opened tonight with a house I have any intention of entering." That was the fourth quotable line, and it was long, and she said it without raising her voice, and when she was finished, she closed the folder and set her hands on top of it. And Kang Min-jae, 41 years old, chairman of Daehan Holdings, sat on a floor cushion in a guest house in Pyeongchang-dong, and understood, for the first time in his adult life, that a woman had come back not for him, but through him, and that this was a form of love he had never in his life earned and did not, at that moment, know how to receive. He asked quietly what she needed. She told him. 9 days later, at 11:47 in the morning of the 26th of April, Kang Min-jae walked into the boardroom on the 27th floor of the Daehan Holdings building in Yeoksam-dong, carrying a black leather portfolio and a small paper bag from a bakery in Bukchon. He had not slept more than 3 hours a night in the interval. He had eaten 1 meal a day, and the meal had been, on 6 of the 9 days, a bowl of doenjang jjigae that a woman named Mrs. O, who had cooked for his Halmione for 31 years, had brought to his apartment in a stacked stainless steel dosirak with a note in her old-fashioned Hangul reading, "Eat while it is warm, young master." 7 men were seated at the table. His uncle Kang Byung-ho was at the far end. Han Sung-jin was on the right-hand side, 3 seats from the head. Jang, the lawyer who had handled the divorce and the marital property revision, was at the left, a fountain pen already uncapped on the leather blotter in front of him. Kang Min-jae did not sit. He set the portfolio on the table. He opened it. He placed, one at a time, 7 objects on the polished walnut. A wire transfer confirmation from a Singaporean private bank dated the 3rd of March in the amount of 1,470,000,000 won. A notarized statement from a compliance officer at the same bank, taken in Singapore on the 11th of April, 3 days before her colleague had fallen from the 7th floor of an apartment building she did not live in. A USB drive containing, he said, 41 hours of recorded telephone calls between Han Sung-jin and a nominee in the Cayman Islands, obtained under a lawful production order issued by a magistrate in Zurich under mutual legal assistance treaty procedures. A coroner's supplementary note from Vladivostok, translated into Korean, indicating that the drowning of the logistics manager had been reclassified on the 14th of April as suspicious. A copy of Court Order 2025-Hyung- Sang-1147, issued that morning by the Seoul Central District Court, freezing the assets of the Labuan Trust and of 3 related shells pending investigation. A single sheet of paper bearing the signatures of 41 members of the Daehan management, employees whose loyalty he had, until this month, taken for granted, and whom, he now realized, he had earned the loyalty of anyway, quietly, over 11 years, without noticing. And last, a small envelope containing a single photograph, which he did not remove from the envelope and which he did not need to. He spoke without raising his voice. He had never raised his voice in that room. He did not begin then. He said only, "Te Huna." It was the nickname he had used once at a dinner in the autumn of 2016 for Han Sung-jin, a nickname from a story about a boy in a village who had grown up to marry his brother's widow. He had never used the nickname since. He had assumed no one else in the room remembered it. Han Sung-jin's face told him, in the space of half a second, that at least one other person did. Han Sung-jin did not answer. The silence lasted 11 seconds. It filled the boardroom the way water fills a glass, from the bottom, patiently, until there is no more room for anything else. It was the loudest thing that had happened in that building in 19 years. That was the 5th quotable line, and it was not a line. It was the silence itself. The prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation on the 29th of April. The indictments came down on the 14th of May. 7 counts against Han Sung-jin, 4 against the lawyer Jang, 2 against Kang Byung-ho, who chose, at the age of 68, to take a flight to a country with which Korea did not have an extradition treaty, and from which, to date, he has not returned. The court orders were bureaucratic. 2025-Hyung-Sang-1147, 2025-Hyung-Sang-1148, 2025-Hyung-Sang-1149, freezing in sequence the Labuan Trust, the Singaporean accounts, and the Cayman shells. The engagement to Han Yerin was called off on the 2nd of May in a 2-line statement that mentioned neither family by name, and that was carried on the 3rd page of one economic daily and on the last page of another. Kang Min-jae did not attend the press conference. He did not give an interview. He drove to Yangpyeong on the afternoon of the 3rd of May, alone in a car he drove himself, and he stood at the small gray stone in the hillside cemetery for 1 hour and 41 minutes. He did not weep. He set on the stone a small paper bag of the sweet rice cakes his daughter had never lived long enough to taste, and he sat on the cold ground beside it, and he watched a line of ants move around the base of the stone. And after a long time, he stood up, and he walked the 300 meters down the hill to the hanok. And he sat with his halmioni in the kitchen while she ate a bowl of samgyetang he had, for the first time in his life, cooked for her himself. It was not a good samgyetang. She ate all of it. She held his hand across the table when she was done, and she said nothing, because there was, at that moment, nothing that needed to be said that she had not already said in 2022 in the courtyard where the persimmon tree stood. He began, then, the slow work of return. He sent, on the 2nd Thursday of May, a wooden crate of pears from an orchard in Naju to the small apartment in Ahondong, where Adayeze now lived. She accepted the pears. She did not answer the note he had put inside the crate. He sent, on the 3rd Thursday, a jar of doenjang his mother had made from soybeans grown on a piece of land in Chungcheong that had belonged to his father's family since before the war. Adayeze accepted the jar. She did not answer the note. He sent, on the 4th Thursday, a slim volume of poems by Kim Hisoon in the original Korean and in an English translation by Don Mi Choi. Adayeze read the poems. She sent back, at the end of the week, a single postcard on which she had written, in the handwriting he had first seen on an exam booklet in an examination hall at Yonsei. "Thank you for the poems." The translation is good. They met, for the first time since the guest house, on the 14th of June, in a small tea house in Bukchon that his Halmione had liked. She was wearing a linen dress the color of wheat. She had gained back a little of the weight. He watched her drink half a cup of barley tea, and he understood, in a way he had not understood at 28 or at 35, that a woman drinking tea across a table from him was not a thing he was owed. They met again on the 21st and again on the 28th. They walked on the 5th of July along the wall of Changdeokgung in the late afternoon light. On the 12th, she came to the Hanok in Yangpyong for the first time in 5 years, and his Halmione, 91 years old and frailer than the last time Adaizi had seen her, held her face in both hands in the courtyard where the persimmon tree stood, and said, in a voice that carried across the stones, "You have come home, my child. I told him you would." Adaiz wept. Kang Min-jae did not. On the evening of the 2nd of August, in the kitchen of the Hanok, while a pot of anchovy broth simmered on the stove and the light through the paper doors had turned the color of steeped barley, Adaizi set down the wooden spoon she had been holding and turned to face him. She said, "I will not be your wife again. I will not take your name. I will not live in the house in Seongbuk-dong, and I will not sit at your table at the New Year, and I will not be photographed at your side. But I will be, if you will have me, the woman who eats dinner with you on Thursdays. I will be the woman who visits your Halmione with you on Sundays. I will be the woman whose name is on the deed of a foundation. You and I will build together in the name of a child who lived for 11 months and 4 days. That is what I have to offer. That is all I have to offer. Do not ask me for more than that. Do not ask me for less." That was the 6th quotable line. He said yes. The foundation was registered on the 14th of September at the district office in Jongno under the name Chiwon Chinaza Foundation. Its declared purpose was the provision of pediatric cardiac care to children in Korea and in West Africa, whose families could not afford it. Its initial endowment was 4,300,000,000 won, transferred from a personal account of Kang Min-jae into a fiduciary structure that Adaizi had, over the summer, designed with a lawyer she had chosen, and he had not met. He had signed the documents in a boardroom in Jongno on a Wednesday morning. He had read the first 3 pages. He had signed without reading the rest. This time, the not reading was the gift. His Halmione died in her sleep on the morning of the 11th of April, 1 year to the day after the light through the rice paper doors of her cabinet had turned the color of steeped barley. She was 92 years old. She was found by Mrs. O at 7:34 a.m. in the small back room where she had slept for 51 years, with a quilt she had sewn in 1979 pulled up to her chin and a book of poems by Han Kang open on the pillow beside her. The funeral was on the 14th. The family gathered at the Hanok, all of them, uncles, cousins, the ones who had pressured for the divorce and the ones who had said nothing, and Adaiz, who had come from Icheondong in a black hanbok she had borrowed from her mother-in-law. Kang Min-jae's mother read the letter aloud in the courtyard at 11:47 in the morning, standing under the persimmon tree. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. The final paragraph was the one everyone remembered afterwards. "The greatest treasure I leave behind," his Halmione had written, "is not my land and not my jewelry, and not the money my grandson has multiplied beyond anything I can imagine. It is the woman who taught this family what loyalty looks like. Do not, when I am gone, let anyone in this family forget that she has already had my blessing. She had it in the winter of 2022. She has it now. She will have it when I am no longer here to give it." The jade bracelet was on Adaise's wrist as the letter was read. Then, at the end of the reading, the elder from the mother's side of the family, an aunt of Kang Min-jae's mother, 94 years old, who had flown from Osaka for the funeral because she had been born there in 1931 and had never been comfortable traveling by train, asked, in Japanese-inflected Korean, if she could speak. She spoke for 4 minutes. She said that in the winter of 2007, in a courtroom in Seoul, a young woman had been convicted of a fraud she had not committed and had been sent to a prison in Cheongju for 3 years and 8 months, and had died in the 11th month of her sentence of an untreated pneumonia the prison doctor had, in his testimony to the review board, described as one of those things that medicine does not yet fully understand. The young woman's name had been Kang Ji-hai. She had been the elder sister of Kang Min-jae, 12 years older than him, and she had died when he was 17. And the family had told him only that she had been ill and had not spoken her name at dinners after 2008, and had, over the years that followed, allowed her to become a silence at the edge of every gathering. The elder said then that the prosecutor whose office had, in the previous spring, opened the investigation into Han Sung-jin, a woman named An Soon-young, 47 years old, senior prosecutor in the Special Investigation Division, had been, in 2007, a first-year prosecutor assigned to review the case against Kang Ji-hai, had believed at the time that the case was wrongly brought, had been overruled by her superior, and had, for 18 years since, quietly kept the file on her shelf. The elder said further that Adaise, in the spring of the previous year, when the firm in Zurich had first brought her the Labuan matter, had gone to An Sun-young because she had, in the second year of her marriage, read the trial transcript of Kang Ji-hee in a folder her husband had kept in a locked drawer and had not spoken of afterwards, and had wanted the prosecutor to know that the fraud she had once suspected had been the seed of the fraud she was now uncovering. The grave in the hillside cemetery in Yangpyeong, the elder said, held not only a child. It held, at the family's request in the spring of 2008, a small locked box containing the ashes of the sister no one in the family had known how to bury properly at the time. And the vow Adaise had made in that guest house in Pyeongchang-dong in April had not been a vow only to a living Halmeoni. It had been a vow to a dead sister-in-law whom Adaise had never met, and whose name she had, for 4 years, whispered into the earth of that hillside every time she had climbed it. The elder asked, then, one thing. She asked that the deed of the hillside plot, 300 meters of hillside above the Hanok, held in the family name since 1947, be transferred into the name of the Chiwon Chinaza Foundation, in perpetuity, so that the 2 graves and the trees around them would belong not to the family, but to the children the foundation would serve. She asked that the transfer be signed that afternoon, before the guests dispersed. Kang Min-jae signed the deed in the kitchen of the Hanok at 4:12 in the afternoon. He read the first 3 pages. He signed without reading the rest. That was the 7th quotable line, his signature on a piece of paper he had not fully read, given to a foundation named after his daughter, and secured by the memory of a sister whose name he had not been permitted to say for 20 years. His Halmeoni's mother's cousin bowed to him as he set down the pen. He bowed back, lower, and held the bow for a long time. On the wall of the small back room of the Hanok, next to the bed where his Halmeoni had died, there hung, in a plain wooden frame, a photograph. It had been taken in the courtyard on the day of Chiwon's Dolbanchi in the autumn of 2021, 3 weeks before she died. Chiwon was on Adaise's hip, Kang Min-jae was standing to a Daisy's left in a gray suit. His Halmione was seated in a wooden chair in front of them, her hands folded in her lap, wearing a hanbok the color of pale pomegranate. In the corner of the frame, in her handwriting, in Korean and in Igbo, and beneath them both in English, she had written, "My daughters and my son." And below that, one date, October 3rd, 2021. Adaize kept the photograph. She hung it on the wall of her apartment in Aicheondong, and later on, the wall of the foundation's office in Jongno, and later still on the wall of a small clinic the foundation opened in Enugu in 2027. And every child who came through the clinic passed, on their way from the waiting room to the pediatric cardiologist's office, beneath a photograph of a woman in a wooden chair with two women standing behind her, and a child on the hip of the woman on the left. A boy buries his sister in silence because his family has taught him that silence is the only inheritance he is permitted. A man exhumes her name, gives it to a foundation, and pours the tea for the woman who spoke it into the earth before he could. If you have stayed with me this far, if you sat in that guest house with him at 9:47 p.m., if you stood in the courtyard under the persimmon tree, if you read the letter aloud in your own voice, then here is the one thing I will ask of you before I let you go. Tell me in the comments the name of the person in your life who saw your worth before you did. Just the name, nothing else. And then, if this story has done for you what stories are supposed to do, subscribe to Midnight Love Saga and tap the small bell so that when the next chapter comes, and it is coming in a house you have not yet visited, in a city whose name you do not yet know, it finds you the way this one did, quietly, in the small, quiet hour, when you needed it most. Stay with me. There are more rooms to open, and I would like, very much, to open them with you.